Plant Forum, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, am I good to go here?
Yes, you are.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Carol Bornstein. I'm a member of the board of the Southern California Horticulture Society, and I'm delighted to introduce our speaker this evening, Dennis Mudd. I can't remember when I learned about Dennis. It might have been through an article in California Native Plant Society's, one of its journals, or it could have been a podcast that he did with Jennifer Jewell on cultivating place a few years ago. He is, he's well known in the native plant world for helping to, actually for starting Calscape, which I believe he will be sharing some of the story about that with us this evening. It's a phenomenal website that is a valuable resource for people interested in growing California native plants. And before that, he actually had a lot of experience in the digital world having to do with music. And I don't know anything about the companies that he helped to form. Maybe he'll share some of those stories with us, maybe not. I believe that his love of plants, native plants, may have stemmed from his devotion to cycling, to being an avid mountain biker. But again, maybe he will share that backstory with us as well. So the only other thing I'd like to just let everybody know about is that he's on to another endeavor, another nonprofit. He's co-directing the Smart Food Foundation, which helps to provide food-related education to low-income communities in the San Diego area. And last but not least, the garden that he's going to be illustrating for us tonight was the recipient of a Home and Garden Award by, was it the San Diego Horticulture Society?
It was a San Diego Home and Garden.
Home and Garden.
Garden of the Year in 2014.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing his images of that and to hear more about his experience in the world of California native plant horticulture. So please welcome Dennis.
Well, thanks, Carol. And I should say, just to point out to everybody that's listening, for me, it's a real honor to get an invitation from Carol because she wrote the first book that I read on native plants, just as I was starting to learn, and I used it as kind of my Bible for years and years, and it kind of wore it out, I think, trying to plan out my garden and figure out what plants I was going to put in different places. So thanks for the invitation and thanks for the book, Carol. It's great to be here. You are welcome. To share some information. So let's see. So let's see, share screen. So it's this one, I think. All right, is that working? All right, good.
It's coming.
This is my first time hosting a Zoom. Wrong one. First time hosting a Zoom. I should probably start at the beginning, I think. There we go. All right, so so really the topic of my presentation is nature restoration landscaping, and it's a philosophy of native plant gardening that I kind of came to through trial and error over the last 15 years. A lot of error, a lot of mistakes, a lot of dead plants, and I kind of want to share my process of how I went from a complete novice. I ran digital music companies, as Carol said, and kind of gradually got more and more enthralled by nature, and I'll share kind of the process that I went through. Okay, so as Carol said, I'm a mountain biker, so that's probably the thing that really got me into native plant landscaping and loving native plants. I used to run a company called Music Match, then after that a company called Slacker, so I was working crazy hours, 16, 18 hours a day, a lot of days. And I would unwind by riding bikes in the backcountry of San Diego, so the hills and the valleys and the canyons. And gradually, I just started falling in love with the nature and that I saw around me, falling in love with the plants, just the whole feeling I got whenever I was in nature. So at some point in time, I guess around 15 years ago, I decided that I really wanted my garden, which was palm trees and grass at the time, to look not like that, but to look like the nature that I was going through. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. figured a lot out and tried to create a site called Calscape, which I then donated to CNPS, California Native Plant Society, to try and make it easier for people to do the same things that I did. And as I said earlier, it's kind of like a nice proof point that I could do a nice job of it, create nature in my garden, but also make it beautiful. And my garden won the San Diego Home and Garden of the Year Award in 2014, which, like I said, I thought that was a nice proof point, and hopefully it'll be an inspiration for other people to do similar sort of things. Okay. So this was really my starting point. This is my house 15 years ago or 16 years ago, something like that. And it's a pretty standard, traditional Southern California landscape with lots of grass, lots of palm trees, require a whole lot of water, a big chlorinated pool. And it was nice, it was pretty, but it had nothing to do with the nature that I wanted to create, and to live in. So I hired a landscaper, and I said, I was working quite hard at the time still in the music match, and I said, put in natives for me. And I didn't really even know what natives were. I just had a vague idea. I didn't know the names of the plants. I just said, okay, put in natives. And what I got was native plants, but plants that were native to Australia and South Africa for the most part. They were really low water plants or drought resistant sort of plants, but they weren't native to even the Western Hemisphere. A lot of rock rose and butterfly bush, acacias and kangaroo pods, and the worst of all for me were the African feathergrass. And you can see there's a lot of it in this picture, this stuff right here. And I'm still pulling that out 15 years later. It's just incredibly invasive, and again has nothing to do with nature. So I tried step 2, and step 2 was really I made sure that I had California native plants, and these were all plants that were native to California. But I ended up getting cultivars, because that's the thing that were the most common in the nursery trade, is cultivars that really are based for the most part on Central California or even Northern California kind of coastal sort of plants. And they're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful. This is a picture of a Ceanothus concha here. And it's got to be the most beautiful Ceanothus I've ever seen. Incredible flowers, particularly the first few years. Green year round, but unfortunately for me, they didn't survive. They couldn't survive more than a few years, 3 or 4 years after planting. And I had a lot of different cultivars in, and I tried everything. I tried watering, lots, little, indirect watering, no watering. But the problem was that they just don't belong here. They didn't belong in the part of San Diego County I live in, which is really only 10 miles from the beach, but it's a lot drier 10 miles from the beach than it is close to the coast in Central California. And so basically I was spending all my weekends chainsawing down Ceanothus and other dead plants and going to the dump all the time. Very depressing. So I learned a lot killing all these plants, but it was really sad. And so what I noticed is that as I was going through the process, the very few straight natives I had that were truly native to the part of San Diego County I live in, were doing great. They seldom died, they thrived. And as time went by, I figured, okay, I'm just going to grow the local natives, the natives that belong here. It took me a long time to figure out what those were, and that was sort of the genesis of Calscape. But once I figured out the plants that really naturally belonged in the part of Poway I lived in, and also kind of the micro-site sort of locations that they naturally belonged in, plants started dying, and I started seeing a huge amount of biodiversity, all kinds of insect life and other animal life, bird life. And kind of best of all, it was really easy. Nature really did all the work. Once I figured out this process of what I call biomimicry, native plant landscaping. So I tried to mimic nature as much as possible, and that's what worked. So really this, for me, it all comes down to native plant landscaping or nature restoration landscaping. All comes down to mimicking nature as much as you possibly can. First and foremost is choosing the plants that really naturally belong where you're growing them. And if you can do that, everything else is pretty easy. You can still kill these plants. And in part is the trickiest thing is providing a way of irrigating that is natural. That in San Diego County and really most of the developed part of the state, all the drainages have been paved over. So you really don't see the natural sort of drainages going down wet areas or moisture areas, ravines in a developed area. It's all kind of flat, or it tends to be pretty flat and quite dry. So if you're going to grow plants that need somewhat moisture soil, like toyons, for example, or oaks, even semi-riparian plants, you have to find a way to get water into the system. So I'll talk about that. Natural weed control, also very important. If you don't do a certain number of specific things, weeds will become very, very difficult. Natural mulching and natural pest control. So I'll talk about all those things in the next few minutes. Okay. So first of all, natural plant selection. A lot of people say, okay, well, these are California native plants, so you just put a California native plant in California, everything's going to be fine, right? But it really isn't that simple at all. That California is a state of incredibly different climatic conditions. So you really need to know the plants that actually grow and thrive and naturally belong in the same climate that you're growing them in, that you live in, or you really don't know what's going to happen. So it's a risk. But also in terms of the microsite, there's all different kinds of soil moisture. Some plants live at the bottom of drainages. Some live in super dry sort of mesas and everywhere in between. So you want to get the right plant in the right spot from a soil moisture point of view, drainage point of view. I think sun conditions are quite obvious. But then also other ecological relationships where you want to grow plants where the pollinators that belong with those plants live. So, where you kind of co-evolved with herbivores to create a natural ecosystem, which is what I wanted to do. Okay. So this chart just kind of shows what we started off with in Calscape, that we broke every part of the state down into 1 square mile grids. And we measured the range of annual precipitation, summer temperature, winter temperature, summer humidity, actually winter humidity as well. But you can see that the state is incredibly diverse, even within relatively small, these climatic conditions are very different, even within small areas of the state. For example, I live in Poway, which is 10 miles from the coast. We get about 14 inches of rain. In San Diego City, down by the coast, it's 8 or so inches of rain. And then you go another 5 or 6 miles east of here and you get 22 inches of rain. So dramatically different environmental conditions, just 5 or 10 miles away. And then of course, as you go up and down the coast, it becomes even more dramatic. So we took that information. Well, actually, before I finish that, I said that it really does matter, because while there are about 7,000 plants that grow natively in San Diego, that are really native to San Diego, in any given square mile, only 10% of those plants will actually naturally grow. So it's important that you know what those plants are if you want to make your native plant landscape as reliable as possible, as easy as possible, and you want to avoid taking a lot of trips to the dump. Okay, and this is a little out of focus, I'm afraid, but it's just an example of one of the plant maps. So we created plant maps for every one of the different 7,000 species of plants that are native to California. And we looked at the actual observations of those plants in nature using the California Consortium of Herbarium observations that have been really adding up since the mid 1800s. There's millions of them. I think it's actually up to about 3 million now occurrence of these plants. And so these show the occurrences here in blue squares for Penstemon spectabilis, or showy penstemon. It's a beautiful plant, really grows only in the southern part of Southern California. And what we did is we said, well, we don't know every square mile they grow in, but we know the range of climates that they grow in, and we know the biozones that they grow in. So we basically use a number of algorithms to extrapolate where the plants actually most likely do. We estimate where the natural ranges were, and this in yellow shows the estimated natural range for this particular plant. We got a lot of great help from UC Berkeley and the Jepson Herbarium to put this together and to plan this out, and also from CNPS. Okay, so that's part of it. So, grow the plants that actually belong where you live, but the other part is on a square mile sort of climate sort of a basis. But then you also really need to grow the plants that are in the right soil, sun exposure, or the right place, microplace. Sun exposure, as I said, is obvious, but soil drainage can be a little bit tricky. Most California plants need good drainage. So they either need to be in kind of sandy soil or they need to be on slopes. There's not that many flat areas in a lot of California, in particular Southern California, where, well, I guess there's a lot of, I'd say the rule is hilly sort of areas. So our plants, they evolve for the most part, other than riparian plants and some others, to grow on hillsides. And so you really got to be careful with the drainage requirements of California native plants. And you've also got to be very, very careful with the kind of moisture that the plants have during the summer. So even sandy soils, if they dry out too much and there's no nearby water source, a lot of plants aren't going to be able to grow there. This kind of shows an example that, actually, maybe I'll just jump to the next slide. That you got riparian zones where there's a lot of fantastic plants that either grow in or nearby riparian plants or riparian zones. They need a lot of water. Either they stretch their roots out or they're right in the water. So there's certain plants for those sort of situations. North-facing slopes in California tend to have a lot more moisture than other facing slopes. And so you see a lot of your kind of most interesting shrubs like manzanitas in Southern California will mostly be growing on north-facing slopes. South-facing slopes are the driest, particularly upper parts of south-facing slopes. So only the most drought tolerant of all plants are going to be able to grow there. And east-facing slopes are sort of in the middle where you have shrubs, but somewhat more drought tolerant shrubs like ceanothus that can handle a little bit drier soils, but not really dry soils. Okay. All right, and this shows a page at Calscape. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over Calscape, but it's a great tool. This advanced search, you can type in your address, and there's a page right before this where you just check the boxes of the different kinds of plants you want. In this case, you want shrubs, you want plants that require sun. You're going to plant in a sunny spot. You want fast drainage. Still have very low water requirements, so they can get by with very little water, dry soils. Very easy to grow, considered easy to grow, and they're in my favorite nursery, which happens to be Moosa Creek Nursery up the road from me. And so this will show you all the different plants that match that criteria, that match those various different criteria. And if you click on any of those different thumbnails, it'll show you all about the plant, down to very specific issues and conditions and pruning and so on. So I definitely recommend using this tool if you're interested in native plant gardening. You can kind of use it to create plant lists and then go buy the plants that you want to buy at your local nursery. It's actually, as I said, now Calscape is it's by far the most popular California native plant website that there is, and I think it's a great resource for a lot of people. Okay. So next is irrigation. So you've got all the plants, you got them kind of in the right spots that you think you're going to want them in, but and a lot of times we really do need to apply moisture to the environment, to the situation. So as I said before, before development, you had all these open canyons with ravines and natural drainages that would, or even bottoms of long slopes that would collect a lot of water. And most of that is gone now with everything paved and all the runoff going to sewers. Groundwater, you're not seeing anywhere near as much water in the ground as you used to. So for the most part, unless you're growing very, very drought tolerant plants, you probably are going to need to add some moisture to the system, especially if you don't want things that are so dry to be so dry during the summer months that they're fire damage. So that's kind of part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that California native plants can be tricky, that it's difficult to water them in the summer. If you apply direct water to, I'd say, most California native plants during the summer months, there's a pretty good chance that after they're mature anyway, that they're going to die. They don't like to be watered much at all in the summer, and even once a month direct watering can sometimes kill mature local natives. So, one of the questions is I spent a lot of time trying to figure out is, why is that? Why does summer water tend to kill California native plants? And the answer really is the mycorrhizal roots. And there are really very few California native plants that can survive without mycorrhizae growing, the mycorrhizal fungi growing throughout the plant roots. And it's an amazing symbiotic relationship. There's probably as much biomass in the mycorrhizal fungi below the surface of the soil as there is plant mass above the surface of the soil. It's an incredible system growing in and around the roots. And you can kind of think of it as, I'm sure a lot of people already know this, but you can almost think of them as little microscopic or super fine root extensions that are able to metabolize micronutrients and bring them into the plant roots that the plant could not otherwise absorb. And particularly important for Southern California, it really increases the water absorption capabilities of root systems dramatically by up to 1000x. It'll store water like a sponge in the soil so that it makes it available for plants during the summer. It actually excretes chemicals that repress weeds and other soil pathogens. It keeps the soil nice and healthy, keeps all the entire community of different fungi and different bacteria in balance. Finally, and well, I guess not finally, but one of the other things it does is it will also send out chemical signals along with the plant to attract insect predators when the plants are under too much stress from insect herbivores. So it's an incredible system. And unfortunately, the mycorrhizal species, there's millions of mycorrhizal species, but the ones that evolved to grow in and with California native plants often die if they're warm and wet. You see the system get out of balance, see bacteria become too high a percentage of the overall community. The mycorrhiza dies, the soil becomes sick, and the plant will die as well. So it's critical to avoid that. So basically, how do you get water into the system that's necessary without watering the plants directly? And what I've learned to do is just kind of mimic nature in this. That in nature, you look at the most beautiful spots, that are green in the summer, and they tend to have a water source that's nearby. So they have a creek, or a lot of times have very mature, large trees. So plants that are extending the roots out laterally and pulling in moisture from creeks or irrigated areas. Well, in nature, it's creeks or ponds or things like that, pulling it into the dry soil areas and then sharing it with a shallower rooted or smaller rooted plants. And then you also see trees and shrubs with big long roots that are actually pulling water up from groundwater or even the water table in some cases, but pulling it up into the drier surface soils and also sharing it with the other plants. So basically, it's a system of lateral water transfer and water uplift that kind of is used in nature. And that sounds interesting to me. So I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading. That there's so much interesting new research on root depths and how plants survive in wild areas. And we're finding is that somewhat unlike garden areas where root systems are not certainly as deep and usually not as extensive because there's a lot of water. In nature, a lot of plants are very drought stressed, and so they develop much more extensive root systems. They have to go down, they have to go out, and this just shows a sampling of some of the measured root widths. So you see, oaks and cottonwoods can create root diameter systems of 400 to 200 feet around the plant. Manzanitas, 20 feet away or so, 40-foot sort of diameter, and even small plants like monkey flower or yerba santa can have root diameters of 10 to 6 feet. So really, these root systems can go way out in drought stressed plants. And what they'll do is they'll go out and they've also been a lot of research that plants can actually hear the vibrations of water, and so they'll stretch the roots out to the water that they hear, I guess, as well as sense, and they'll pull it quite long distances from the riparian areas up into the semi-riparian areas they may be, and then the next set of plants will pull it from there up bank a little bit, and the next set of plants will pull it up bank. So you've got ladders of roots that pull a lot of water from riparian or surface water areas and pull it into the drier soil areas. Okay, so you have the same sort of thing going on with root depth, and maybe this is the thing that's the most different when you're talking about normal gardens versus nature, or even a nature restored garden. That you have very drought stressed plants, and they put roots down much more extensively. So oaks can reach down 80, 60, 70 feet to reach down to the water table, or just subterranean water sources. And even, you can see this chart, but you can look, a lot of the shrubs can still go down 30, 20 feet. Ceanothus, that are kind of seen, I think, I've read a lot about them not being considered deep rooted plants. They still can go down 10 feet. Even toyon, which are considered, at most medium root plants, medium-sized root plants, can go down 7 feet. So you really have a lot of roots that are going down, sometimes crazy levels to get surface water, and very often, still quite deep water that they can pull up all year. And some of the research has shown that large trees can deliver 40 to 60 gallons of water to the upper soil levels every night, particularly when their stoma are closed and they're not transpiring. The water will just stay, that they bring up through the root systems, will stay at the surface, stay in the surface soil at night, and then be used up during the day. Smaller shrubs can deliver up to a quart of water to surface soils every night. And then they've also measured that the shallow root plants, like sages, for example, or other subshrubs or perennials, can get 20 to 60% of the moisture that they use from the water that's being uplifted by the deep root plants. And I just saw statistics as I was updating this presentation, that they found that large oaks can transpire. That's bringing up water, but then having it go through its leaves. Evaporate through its leaves, can transpire 40,000 gallons of water per year through its leaves. So just amazing amounts of water come up through these deep-rooted systems. Spend the night, for example, the water will come up through the surface level soil and get a little bit moisture during the night, and then it'll be used by all the different plants that are in that ecosystem in the day to meet its needs. Okay. And so you can see, this is my way that I've irrigated it. So, the way that I have mimicked this sort of system of natural irrigation. First and most important thing is that after plants are established, I never directly irrigate them. And really, because of my plants are always under stress, there's really hardly any absorptive roots that are near the plant stem anyway, so it wouldn't even do that good. It would just screw up the mycorrhizal fungi that's near the plant. So I never do any direct irrigation. What I did is I created a kind of catch basins like this pretend creek. They catch water in the winter, and then I irrigate them. There's actually bubblers in this little creek area, and this creek area here. In the dry season, I keep it like it's a creek. And plants have been, I believe that plants have been gradually extending their roots out to these relatively small number of mimicked riparian areas, and they're pulling their water away. Then I have a lot of deep-rooted plants like this oak that are also pulling up ground moisture, and as the roots, as they mature and the roots get deeper and deeper, every year all the plants that are around them are staying greener through the year as well. This just kind of shows a little bit more the different elements that I've used to be able to put a little bit of water into the system. This first one on the upper left is not really nature mimicry. It really is nature. There's a little seasonal creek at the bottom of my property, and plants are pulling up water from that. I talked about these bioswales. An Engelmann oak, it's kind of a dry soil oak, is planted here, and it's making all the plants around here drier even through the summer. More evergreen through the summer and less drought stressed. This is actually a irrigated area, and a willow just grew on its own, a red willow. It's now much larger already. And that's also bringing moisture into the soil, and plants are extending their roots out to that. And finally, by the house is where I want my least dry plants, just for fire reasons, if nothing else. And so I have a lot of bubblers that are right now near the house, and then 4 to 6 feet away from the bubblers, I have a lot of toyon or other kind of semi-riparian plants that need a little bit more water, and they're stretching their roots out, not too far to get to these relatively small number of little moist areas that are simulating a little creek or stream or seep. And so this seems to be working. That as my whole garden fills out and the roots go out and the roots go down every year, it's greener through the summer season, and I'm less worried about fire, and everything is more verdant every year. Okay, so next let's get to mulching. And mulching is a real big topic in native plant world. So, for example, the government to get native plant bonuses, I guess, or I can't remember the word. So anyway, they pay people a little bit of a refund in order to do a native plant. You have to put down a whole lot of mulch, and a lot of the guys will say put down 2 feet of mulch, or just heavy layers of mulch, and a lot of times that's bark or wood chips. And what I found is that just doesn't work at all in a real natural sort of system. You have to just water it like crazy to get the water through the mulch, through heavy mulch like that. When the rains start, for example, when I used to have a layer of mulch like that, and one of the experiments I had, the rain would never get through the mulch, and so you'd end up just watering the mulch, and underneath that you'd have very dry soil. In addition, the mycorrhiza that grows in the soil isn't really set up to convert or to break down big chunks of wood like that. So what I try to do is, first of all, add rocks. Rocks are great mulch. All California native plants like having rocks around. But after that, particularly after a plant is established, let the plant create their own organic mulch. That's really the mulch that they evolved to grow in. And it's the mulch that the mycorrhizal fungi that grow in they grow in the roots under that plant evolved to metabolize and to eat as well. So and that really seems to work, because these are the leaf litter that grows naturally under native plants. It's very dry and sort of brittle. It doesn't soak up much water at all. It for the most part, in terms of minimizing evaporation, it will mostly just shades the roots, and that's very important. So allow the plants to build up their own mulch system. Allow it to shade the roots. Maybe plant a little bit more closely so the branch can also shade the soil, so there's less moisture loss. And finally, don't fertilize, because the fertilizer will really destroy the mycorrhiza fungi that grows in the roots. So anyway, another biomimicry example, natural mulching. Next is weed control. Because for the most part, we don't have native plant landscapers don't have grass or thick ground covers that will squeeze out all the weeds. Weeding can be a big issue. That a lot of people, particularly those that provide water on a regular basis to a lot of their natural landscape, will see that they are pulling weeds all the time. And what I found is that the single best way to avoid weeds is to keep most of the ground bone dry during the summer. So don't do any overhead watering for 99% of the ground, just your few designated riparian areas. And you really won't have very many weeds at all. Maybe you have a few weeds in the winter, but they'll all dry out in the summer. And as every summer goes by, you get fewer and fewer weeds. What I also like to do is to plant the natives closely enough so that the roots are interconnecting. And when they interconnect, the mycorrhizal networks interconnect. And the mycorrhiza secretes chemicals that really finish the weeds off. If you notice in pristine natural areas, I've got a couple canyons that are near me. There are never any weeds in those canyons. And as my My garden has matured and the mycorrhizae networks have matured. I never have any weeds anymore except in the riparian areas, and I do have to pull the weeds in the riparian areas every year. Lastly, avoid Roundup. You know, I used to use it all the time because I knew I had to kill weeds. Weeds are the enemy of native plants. It ends up just causing way more harm than good. Whenever I would spray an area with Roundup, I'm sure that it killed the mycorrhizae because the weeds would come back like way worse than ever before after that first set of weeds died. So let's jump to rodent control. So rodent control can be really tricky, particularly in the early stages of a garden. That you put these nice new plants. There aren't that many plants. They're kind of small. Can't afford to lose very many leaves before you feel like things aren't going well. And in the beginning, especially, you will see a fair amount of leaf loss due to rabbits. Well, at least if you're in my area, you'll see a lot of leaf loss due to rabbits, and chaparral rats will take a lot of little twigs and branches, and sometimes they'll eat the majority of a plant, particularly a new one with nice soft leaves. And you know, there's a temptation to trap. You know, and a lot of people even poison the rodents, which is the very worst worst possible thing you can do, because the solution really is to wait for the predators to come. And I know it sounds like it's not instant gratification, but it happens so quickly that as time went by, even like within a year or so, I started seeing a lot more raptors. I started seeing lots of roadrunners. Coyotes started coming in, more snakes, and before you knew it, there were hardly any. I barely saw rabbits or other rodents around, and really, it just kept in balance. And I started to notice that it was just wonderful having all these raptors. The owls are amazing. The hawks are amazing. I wish I had more rodents now so that I could have more raptors. But it really is not that difficult to keep things in balance once you allow predators to arrive. And maybe the single most important thing is don't poison, because the poison always gets into the predator system. So you'll see dead. I know so many people that have, you know, their neighbors poisoned, and so they see dead owls and dead hawks. It's just really terrible. So that's the single most important thing. Okay. And this is actually a little family of great horned owls that decided to set up camp in the back of my garden, and it was really amazing that these raptors got to know us after a while. So for a full year after they were born, they would just hang around our garden, keeping all the rabbits at bay and rats, and oftentimes they would just go to the branches that were near where my wife and I used to watch the sunset, and we do call and response, the woo-hoo response with the different owls. So it's really wonderful, and there's few things as cool as having a whole family of great horned owls in your property. All right, and this is a terrible quality picture, but you can see what happens when nature gets too close. This is a red-tailed hawk that decided to fly into my house, and dogs scared it, and it tried to get out one window, but then decided took a quick turn and just did 3 graceful flaps out the window on the other side, and that was on its way. But also really kind of cool seeing hawks as well as owls up close on a regular basis. Okay, so the next part is insect control, and insects also plant lovers, I think, instinctively start to think, well, I don't want any of my leaves to be eaten. I want these plants to be perfect. And you try, particularly when there are a lot of caterpillars after a big hatch, you might see a whole lot of caterpillars on a plant, and you say, okay, I got to get some insecticide and kill these, or they're going to damage my plant. And I actually did that a couple of times too. I saw there was a whole bunch of mourning cloak caterpillars, millions of them it seemed like, that were on a willow, and they were just devouring it. So I used insecticide. Now I know a lot more, and I realized what a giant mistake that was. That probably set me back, a year in terms of creating a natural working ecosystem with natural predators. So when I stopped when I realized I shouldn't do that, stop poisoning, I saw that very quickly the number of predators that started to arrive was through the roof. And I didn't know this at the time, but as I said before, when plants are under stress, they and their mycorrhizal fungi allies will send out chemical systems, and they start to attract lots of different insect predators. And I see them all the time now. They're everywhere. So many spiders, all different kinds of spiders. Tons of dragonflies. You can see this is a picture of I think a blue darter, I think, eating a gnat. This is a picture of I think a California mantis that dropped from the willow that's above the table that we sit outside and eat a lot of meals in the summer. And this is very small, but there are hundreds of them that they're up there, and they drop during this period of time. They drop down all the time. This is a picture of I think a female mantis deciding she didn't want to share her food with her mate. And this is sand wasp. Sand wasps are great for killing and eating flies. So they will catch a housefly and lay their eggs in it. So you don't have to one more housefly you don't have to worry about. Spiders are really the champs in this whole system. There are a lot of them, and by themselves they eat more insect biomass than all the bird species combined. And so that's great, but I love having the birds around also to help also keep the insect population under control. Some amazing statistics that I read. So one hummingbird can eat over 1,000 insects per day, one bat over 6,000 insects a day, and a swallow over 700 insects a day. And I can't vouch for the bats and the swallows, but I can personally vouch for the hummingbirds, that they look like they're on track to eat at least that. So I see them just flying out in the backyard and just buzzing, left and right a few inches at a time, eating the little gnats or insects and hatches. And it looks like in 10 minutes they'll eat 100 little insects, and then I think they eat mostly pollen during a lot of the year, but at least during the mating season, they will feed their insects almost entirely regurgitated insects. And so this is a great picture of a little hummingbird family in the sycamore right outside my back door. She's feeding her babies regurgitated gnats, making sure those gnats don't have to won't bother me. And now I really have just an amazingly varied insect population in my garden. There's just countless species of herbivores and predators, but they're in balance. And the plants are never under any serious stress. And what I've also found is that the plants that would bother people, it used to be the insects that would bother people I never see them anymore. I never see gnats, the kind that would buzz around people. I never see mosquitoes. I never see flies anymore. And it used to be that those were the only kind of bugs that were around, or they represent the majority of the bugs before I started this native plant landscaping project. And there weren't enough predators to be able to keep them under control. Now I have tons of predators, and they eat those mosquitoes and gnats and flies up like crazy, and they really don't bother me. But there are so many cool insects in the sky on a typical evening that it almost looks like Avatar so much, especially when the sun is going down. You can see all the different hatches and all the dragonflies and all the native bees and butterflies. It really is. It's as cool as the rest of the part of the garden. Maybe cooler to see this web of life integrated into your garden. Okay, these are actually pictures of butterfly pictures that I took in about a 10-minute period. So these 4 butterflies were flying around. So this is a gray hair streak, and you see these incredible fluorescences on their side. Marine cloak, Lorcan's Admiral, a California buckeye, and this is a marine blue opening up its wings. And I was kind of wondering why I started seeing so many butterfly species as I grew more and more different plant species. What I learned not that long ago, I read a great book by Doug Ptolemy called Bringing Nature Home. He just pointed out the research that's been done recently. I guess not that recent, but pointed out the research that showed that 90% of insect herbivores are plant specialists. which means that they only evolved to get past the chemical and mechanical defenses of a very small number of plants, usually just a few, sometimes as little as one genera of plants that evolved in the area that they live in. So this gray hair streak, around here, if you need to grow deerweed. If you don't grow deerweed, chances are you're not going to see any of these. That's where they lay their eggs. This morning cloak, they require either oaks or willows, as does Morgan's admiral, typically oak or willow. Let's see, I can't remember these other plants. I think this is these are members of the mustard family that grow native, and I can't remember the marine blue. But typically, you want, if you want a lot of butterflies, grow a lot of different sort of plant species so that you'll have a range of different caterpillars that are going to grow that are suited for those different plants. It's true for butterflies, but it's really true for insects as well. If you want a healthy, varied, kind of cool and interesting insect population, it's best to grow a lot of different native plants, because then you'll have a lot of the different native insects that evolve to eat those different plants. And one of the great things about having a whole lot of insects, besides that they attract a whole lot of insect predators, is that much of the rest of the food chain depends on insects. So really, this co-evolved relationship between native plants and insect herbivores is the real foundation of the food chain. That you need the native plants and the co-evolved insects, or you're not going to really have a working system. And one of the most obvious things is birds. Birds depend on them incredibly. They really aren't going to be able to survive without insects. And one of the key statistics is that 96% of terrestrial bird species depend on insects to feed their young. They're packed full of protein. They're much better protein than seeds and other things that birds eat when they're adults. So little baby birds need insects. And if there are no insects, not many insects in a particular garden or area, you're not going to see many birds. I think, maybe a lot of you have read about the insect Armageddon, that there's such a tiny fraction of the insects there used to be, particularly in the developed part of our state, that, that's one of the reasons why we see a lot fewer birds than we used to. So I think that's one of the key reasons why it's so important to grow native plants, so that we can bring it, so that they will attract the native insects and they will attract the native birds, and really it's worth it. So I know almost everybody, I think, absolutely loves birds. And one of the most exciting things to me as my garden has evolved is just to see the massive number of bird species that now visit my garden on a regular basis. So over the past 2 years, since I started keeping track, become kind of a birder, I've identified over 50 species of birds that have visited my property. So cool scrub jays and California quails that are all over the place. This is a great picture of a male hummingbird that somehow is able to turn on the vibrancy when he was trying to impress a female. But this just shows all the different species of, I guess, almost all 50 of the species that I've seen over the last 2 years. Incredible variety. A real good birder friend of mine from out of town came to visit, and so we went around the different bird reserves in the county, and we ended up just staying at my house because we saw way more birds than we saw in any bird sanctuary. This here is actually this is more like my typical photos. This is a picture of a belted kingfisher. You can barely see it right there. I just took that yesterday, but I just kind of wanted to. It's my favorite bird, probably, that I can think of. It's looking at my pool converted to a pond, looking for minnows it can eat, but just goes to show you the variety of different plants, and it's kind of more honest representation of the typical photo I do, as opposed to my smaller number of good ones. So I talked a little bit about the kingfisher. That's a segue into this. If you really want to supercharge the bird life and the overall life in your garden, and you have a pool, convert it to a pond. So this shows what my pool used to look like. It was a very sterile, chlorinated pool, very ugly. Didn't fit at all with my native garden. I finally, after years of trying to convince my wife, I finally did. She let me convert my pool to a pond, and really it's really simple. just stop chlorinating it, get rid of the filter, and just flow water through through plants that you put into the ground. So these are in pots. These are just floating, and before you know it, you've got crystal clear water. And if you want to put fish in, you can put in it. This image here just shows how clean the actual water gets. It's almost as clean filtered through the plant roots as it was when it was chlorinated. All kinds of birds will arrive. Not a lot of water birds. This is a couple ducks that were passing through, and you can see the bass and the bluegill and crappie here that are kind of checking them out. They're very curious about these birds that are coming. It also shows how clear the water is. Snowy egrets, blue heron, night herons have arrived, green herons, and just by having water like this, you see all kinds of birds, way more terrestrial birds are here as well. A lot of them just attracted by the insects that are also attracted by the water, supercharges the bird predation on the insects, and they're always drinking at the water and always around. Okay, and converting a pool to a pond can be a big deal, but if you don't have a pond, add a plant filtered fountain. You can do same sort of thing. These are marsh pennywort and seat monkey flowers that are growing at a fountain here. And every morning I have my coffee and I watch the bird show. And there's birds that come all over the place, from all over the place, all different types, and they love the super clean water with no chlorine that's filtered by all these different plants. And this shows kind of a low quality video, but this I think may be the record for the number of hummingbirds that came to the fountain one day. I think there's over a dozen or so right around there, right at the same time. And hummingbirds are very territorial, but it seems like they sort of they relax things around the fountains. They're all just right at the fountain, enjoying it, and a little bit of fighting, a little chasing, but it's just another incredible bird show that you get from having plants and water. Okay, I don't have too much more time, so I'm going to try to get through the next set of slides pretty quickly. So I talked a lot about the wonder of the animal life, but natural gardens really are beautiful, even if you just purely look at them from a little bit farther away, just as a garden. And so this is one of the views of my garden, and I think it's kind of awe-inspiring. Just be surrounded by nature. Just nature has this vibe, this beauty that I think there's nothing that's as beautiful as a natural native garden. I'll just show you some pictures, so just a few quick pictures of kind of what my garden looks like. This is the front yard, and you can see this is kind of that creek I told you about, that fake creek, and it's got all kinds of plants that are growing not that far from it, in bigger shrubs away, but Cleveland sages, orange bush monkey flower, spectacular showy penstemon. These are California fuchsia that will turn red, bush rue, lots of oaks, lots of ceanothus, big berry manzanita here. Let's see, bush rue again right here. A lot of different manzanitas, eastwood manzanita, big berry manzanita. This shows the ceanothus that I have planted up on the bank, and so ceanothus usually need to be on slopes, so they need very nice well-draining soil, quick draining soil. This shows the slide here shows the nice paver system I put in. One thing that I should tell you is that there's a fine line between a nature restored front yard and an abandoned house. So when postman started to ask if anybody, I didn't know anybody lived here anymore. This might have been an abandoned house. It made me realize that I needed to put a lot more work into hardscape. So I got rid of the broken concrete driveway and put in nice pavers, and I kind of put in this sort of system as well. This the creek system with a lot of nice rocks, and put in a nice grape bower. This is desert grape in the front yard, and now the front yard looks great. Nobody ever suspects that it might be an abandoned house, and I'd say 1 out of every 2 people that come and visit the house say, "Wow, that's truly amazing." Maybe 1 out of 2 people say, "Wow, this is really unusual." So not for everybody, particularly in a front yard, but I'd say half the people that come visit are blown away by just the vibrancy and the beauty of a native garden, even in the front yard. And this is the backyard. It's probably easier for people to enjoy it. Everybody's blown away by the backyard. This is the willow that grew naturally, and this is one of the very few non-native plants that has survived. It's a trumpet vine growing through the willow. I planted desert grape, so now it's actually much taller than this, and it's just this is just a giant canopy of desert grape and trumpet vine. All the pots are kind of just regular flowers, so non-native flowers in the pots, but then the rest is almost all native. This is that fountain I showed you a little while ago. It's really quite beautiful. Yerba Santa, purple flowering Yerba Santa in the background, marsh pennywort, and seat monkey flower. There's a maidenhair fern that's growing in the fountain and keeping everything nice and clean. Here's the steps down to the lower level, and white sage, California aster, Ancelia californica. This is a coyote bush. There's some little cacti that are down here. A lot of oaks as you go down farther, like Cleveland sages, and this is kind of also the patio area underneath the oak, looking over at the pond. And let's go to the pond, and let's go to lower back now. And this kind of shows the area that's closer to the canyon that's behind my house. So purple sage and Cleveland sage, black sage. This is an island bush poppy. Really hard to get local bush poppies. I actually have a few on order from Moosa Creek this year. A lot of oaks, cottonwoods down here. I think these are California asters, and this is a yucca, a century plant, chaparral yucca. Lots of sages, lots of ceanothus here. Really beautiful area going down to the bottom. Riparian area, and this is an amazing plant, a California Fremontia. They naturally grow in very sandy soils, about 10 feet from a water source, and the natural seasonal creek is over here on the right, and just about 10 feet or so, and it's been perfect for this plant. So a beautiful, beautiful plant. And this is a pool converted to pond. I know I just have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to blow through this pretty quickly. See, seat monkey flower, they're just beautiful. They bloom in the spring and first half of the summer, and they just are spectacular and great for filtering out the plants. California bulrush, southern cattail, oak overlooking. These are scarlet monkey flowers that are growing in this little waterfall area. And here you see little maidenhair ferns that are growing in the cracks of this waterfall sort of system. So it's really quite beautiful. Keeps the water super clean and provides a whole lot of life, and it a little year-round greenness to the area right in front of the backyard. And I also just want to show you, before I finish, I just want to show you I have about 2 acres of property, a little bit less than 2 acres of property, so I have more land, but my son has a small little garden, and he's also a native plant enthusiast, and this kind of shows what he's been able to do. A lot of different sages and manzanitas, and he's got birds like crazy and native insects like crazy, and he just like me and my wife, he and his wife just like to sit here and watch the sunset and watch the bird show and just be surrounded by nature. So really a beautiful native plant garden. He was actually on the CNPS garden tour this last year. So it's beautiful, but one of the big reasons why I created Calscape in the first place, and why I'm kind of a evangelist for native plant landscaping, is because we are seeing just massive destruction of our natural habitat primarily by development. And it's terrible in California. There's, I think, 100 acres of wild land, natural land, that is being destroyed by development and agriculture. I guess overall being destroyed, every single day. And as you can see, it's way worse in Southern California. So development is not going anywhere. It's not stopping. We are rapidly losing our natural area. And as we lose it, we're going to see localized extinctions and even complete extinctions, and people aren't going to be able to see nature, and they're not going to be able to be part of nature. And nature, a lot of nature is just going to disappear forever. But I think one of the things that I really love about nature restoration, landscaping, and gardens, and in the developed part of the state, is that we really can mitigate this and even reverse this trend by bringing nature into just like little pieces of the developed part, one garden at a time. So That's kind of the tagline for Calscape, and what I hope we gradually move to is what I think is the most environmentally responsible, but also the most beautiful form of landscaping, which is really nature restoration landscaping. So I hope some of you give it a try, and thanks very much for opportunity to share some of this information and these thoughts with you.
Well, thank you, Dennis. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say I want to go to your house.
Yeah, I'd love to have you.
All the work that you've put in. And I think what's even more amazing is how much nature you've restored too. And just seeing that second to last slide of how much development is happening through Southern California, just Southern California alone.
Yeah,
It's so important that we all take a bit of responsibility in what we can control.
We humans, we don't really, we operate in very short time scales, and extinctions happen on much longer scales, but we can even see it happening in our own lifetimes. Nature is disappearing. It's disappearing so fast. I think the only way we're going to be able to keep it in large parts of the state, and probably most of the western half of Southern California, is to integrate it into the developed part of our state and into our gardens.
Exactly. Well, Dennis, before we start the Q&A, I know we are over our time right now. So I want to just give a little outro for anyone who might need to leave right now. Our next webinar is going to be on Thursday, December 10th. It's going to be at 7:30 right here on Zoom. It's going to be with Steve Garisher, who was our Plant Forum moderator today. He is going to be giving a webinar called Mission Possible, Growing Roses Organically. So mark your calendars now and be on the lookout on our website and our social media for all of the details. And then last but not least, before we do the Q&A, we're going to do our giveaway of the Theater Pain gift card. Sorry, I had to think about it for a second. Here, I'm going to share everyone's favorite wheel of names, and we will see who the winner is. Sabina, I hope you are here. I think you are. Yes, you are. Sabina, you will find an email from me later tonight. So Dennis, let's get started with a few questions.
Great.
And let's see, whatever questions we don't get to tonight, please feel free to still send them in the Q&A box that we have below, and we'll ask Dennis to answer them later on and then post them to our website. Okay, so I think the first one I want to start with is a question that I also have and Sophie P had. Do you swim in the pond?
I do. So
you do? Wow.
I do. Though I try not to get my ears in the water. So I swim. I actually did dive down to the bottom of the pond to get something that fell in, and I got an earache. So,
Oh, no.
But the water is clear when it's hot. Just splash around. I just don't go underwater. Or just trying to keep my ears in the water. So it's clean, but it's not perfectly clean. It's not as as antiseptic as a pool. There's a lot of life in there.
Clean enough for humans, much better for wildlife.
Yeah, exactly.
We also have a few questions already about whether or not this webinar is going to be recorded. And yes, it has been recorded. So it will be posted onto our YouTube channel in a couple of days. And then again on our website, where you will be able to find it for now until eternity. All right, so a few questions from Paulina O. With dogs around, is it wise to allow coyotes in?
Well, my dogs are big, so my dogs, they'll chase the coyotes. They'll run down the hill and they'll chase all the coyotes away. So it's really I'm not worried about my dogs. But I keep the coyotes never come during the day. What will happen is that we close the doors at night, make sure the dogs stay in, and then we'll start to hear the sound of coyotes hunting, and they'll sweep through the property. There's really nothing that I can do about it. But I don't mind it. eat a lot of rabbits, and they're a big part of the ecosystem. They're a big part of keeping the rodent population under control. And personally, I think coyote is really cool anyway.
Yeah. Well, this one's from Carol B. How much transformation are you seeing toward use of native plants in other gardens in your area?
You know, I'm a little disappointed that I haven't seen that much transfer. At least I haven't seen that much. Maybe my expectations are too high. You know, I go to the next door at my neighborhood sort of thing, and it sounds like more people are doing it on a regular basis. I wish I saw more of it. It's definitely not the rule yet. It's still the exception. You know, maybe 1 in 100 sort of gardens are native gardens in my area. What I do notice is that an awful lot of my mountain biker friends have created native gardens. And a lot of people I'm in with nature a lot. So I think if you spend a lot of time in nature, there's a pretty good chance you're going to have a native plant garden.
Yeah, it would make sense. From Miroslava, is nature restoration landscaping possible when owning pets? We kind of talked about that. She has 3 dogs who are mostly outdoors.
You know, it's fine. Coyotes are the potential problem. Now, you know, if you live on a canyon, coyotes could be an issue. But if you don't live in a canyon, you know, if you have a little parcel of a garden that's in the middle of a developed area with no adjacent access, you're really not going to see coyotes. You know, you're not going to see you're not going to see grizzly bears. You're not going to see, you know, none of the large animals are going to come in. But you will see birds. You know, birds and insects. You know, the insects the cool insects that the bird depend on. They'll go to a little tiny garden in the middle of the inner city very, very easily. So I definitely think it's possible to do nature restoration in any part of the developed part of the state. But yeah, if you have you know, if you live adjacent to a canyon, you've got to be careful of your pets, whether you turn your garden into part of that nature or not.
Now this one's from Alan D. Do you have any growing tips for coffeeberry, Frangula californica?
Well, they like to grow under, you know, they're shade lovers. They grow under oaks. I think the issue is they just grow really, really slowly. It's probably the slowest growing plant that I've ever seen. I've got a 3-year-old plant that's about 6 inches tall or 8 inches tall. The good news is that you know, I didn't mention this before, but the plants that grow very slowly are the longest lived. Plants that shoot up really quickly, they're going to have way less dense tissue, and they're going to be more susceptible to disease, and they have shorter lives. So even ceanothus that I've seen that somehow got more water maybe, or you know, got the roots out to one of my little riparian areas, they grew very quickly. They're the ones that, you know, they'll last 5 or 6 years. The ceanothus, for example, they grow very, very slowly. You know, after 15 years, or 10 years, they show no sign of any problems whatsoever. And I suspect it's going to be the same for coffeeberry. But, you know, coffeeberry, I put it under an oak tree in a shady spot, never touched it after that. And so one thing is I know they really are dependent on mycorrhizae. So I think it probably could be very important for them to be near oak trees, because oak trees are the best spreaders of the kind of mycorrhizae that coffeeberry like.
That's good to know, yeah. This one's from Jill V. Did you have to fill the pool to some degree, or is it quite deep still?
It's quite deep. So I never filled any of it. What I did was I put in a small number of big pots that I put the southern cattails and the California bulrushes in. Planted some wire, some spiny rushes that are kind of on the steps, and then made a platform, sort of a PVC platform that I grew the seat monkey flower on. Other than that, the bottom of the pool is the bottom of the pool, and it really hasn't changed very much. I never gave any, I don't feed the fish. They have to figure out whatever's in there to survive. You know, I think there's little minnows that are in there. I never see them. There's lots of mosquito larvae, I'm sure, that are in there that never, you know, they never make it over to me anyway. Lots of dragonfly larvae, lots of little crustaceans that live in the algae that's in the pool. The bluegill tend to eat those, and there's lots and lots of baby fish. So I think that, that I don't quite understand what's going on in the food chain there, but it's completely self-sufficient.
It's working. So cool. This one's from Carol A. Have you used worm castings when planting?
Never. Yeah, I'm always a little hesitant to put any sort of non-natural things in the soil that kind of wouldn't have been there before. So California natives, I should bring up, they really don't need much nutrients in their soil. In fact, it kind of throws really rich soils with a whole lot of nitrogen aren't good for the mycorrhizae that are so critically important for the health of native plants. Most California native plants live in very, very poor soils. And they may get better over time as their own natural mulch gets in the soil, but you really, it's so different than normal gardening that you really don't want to fertilize. You don't want to put rich addendums. Just take your poor soil. Maybe put some mulch on it in the very beginning if it's a new environment, but as quickly as you can, just let the leaf litter add the really small levels of necessary carbon, allow that to get into the soil through the leaf litter.
Right. And we'll end with this question. And then again, guys, all the questions that remain, we will send to Dennis, and we ask that he answers them at his convenience, and then we'll post them again on our website. So our last recommendation, or our last question here, is from Andrew R. Any good book recommendations? I think you have a few.
Yes, California Native Plants for the Garden is great. Let's see, the other one that I absolutely recommend is Bringing Nature Home by Douglas Tallamy. I think those are the two best books to read. They'll get you a great start. And then maybe the only other one is, go to Calscape. A lot of what I just presented is in the planting guide in Calscape. And so you can have that as well. But the most important thing is the tools in Calscape, where you can type in your location and the characteristics of your lot, of your garden, and it'll give you a really good advice on plants to grow and how to take care of them.
Calscape is fantastic. And if you haven't already heard of it, check it out. Exactly what Dennis said. Well, Dennis, thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you for that awesome presentation. I think everyone is now motivated and everyone wants a pool.
That's awesome. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everybody today. So thank you.
Thank you. And we will be sending you those questions over probably in the next day or so. So again, thank you for everything. Everyone, thank you for joining us as well. And catch us next month for our Roses webinar with Steve Garisher. All right, well, have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.